March 15, 2024. Harrison Ford had been hiding in the Oregon mountains for 15 years. The man who once coordinated death-defying stunts for Hollywood's biggest stars now spent his days carving wood and avoiding cameras. That's exactly why Ryan Gosling showing up at his cabin with a film crew changed everything. 70 million people watched the live stream that night. They saw Gosling accuse Ford of covering up his mother's death. They saw Ford's hands shake as the truth came spilling out. They saw what looked like an old man finally breaking under the weight of his secrets. But they didn't see what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. They didn't hear the conversation that lasted until dawn. And they definitely didn't expect the phone call Ford made the next morning, the one that would destroy Ryan Gosling's entire world. The night Hollywood's most buried secret finally surfaced. The night Harrison Ford proved some truths are deadlier than lies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The shotgun blast shattered the mountain silence at 3:47 a.m. Harrison Ford rolled from his bed, decades of stunt instincts overriding his 81-year-old joints. Glass cascaded from his bedroom window as he hit the floor, the familiar weight of the Remington 870 already in his weathered hands. Someone was in his workshop. Through the splintered window frame, he could see movement in the pale glow of security lights he'd installed after the first death threat arrived last month. A shadow darted between the Douglas firs, too deliberate to be wildlife, too quick to be casual. They'd found him. Ford's bare feet found the cold hardwood as he crept toward the hallway, chambering around with the practiced silence of a man who'd choreographed 1,000 movie gunfights. The irony wasn't lost on him. After 15 years of hiding from Hollywood, he was living in one of its most violent scenes. The motion sensor lights outside his workshop triggered in sequence, creating a trail of illumination that led directly to his sanctuary. 30 years of hand-carved chess sets, music boxes, and children's toys lined those walls. The only honest work he'd done since 2009. Now someone was destroying it all. Another crash. The sound of his lathe hitting concrete. Ford pressed his back against the cabin's log wall, sliding toward the kitchen window that offered the best view of the workshop. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear, but from rage. Whoever this was had crossed the line from psychological warfare into his only remaining sacred space. Through the kitchen glass, he caught sight of the intruder. Tall, lean, moving with the fluid grace of someone comfortable with cameras. Even in the harsh lead glare, Ford recognized the profile immediately. Ryan Gosling hadn't left after all. The actor emerged from the workshop carrying something. One of Ford's hand-carved ravens, the intricate piece he'd spent 6 months perfecting. Gosling held it up to the light, examining it with the same intensity he'd brought to yesterday's interrogation, then deliberately let it fall. The raven exploded against the concrete. Ford's finger found the trigger. The kid wanted his attention. He had it. But as Gosling moved toward the next piece, a child's rocking horse destined for Ford's great niece, something stopped the old stuntman cold. The actor's movements weren't random vandalism. They were methodical, purposeful. He was destroying specific pieces, leaving others untouched. The pieces Ford had carved in 2009, the year Sarah Gosling died. Understanding hit like a stunt gone wrong. This wasn't random destruction. It was surgical. Gosling knew exactly which pieces Ford had created in those dark months after the accident, when his hands shook so badly he could barely hold a chisel. When every cut into wood was an attempt to carve away the guilt. The motion lights clicked off, plunging the workshop into darkness. Ford counted his heartbeats in the silence. 1, 2, 3. On 4, his phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, a text message lighting up the screen. Check your email. The real story goes live in 1 hour. His laptop sat open on the kitchen table, cursor blinking in the search bar like a loaded weapon. Ford's finger hovered over the trackpad. Whatever Gosling had discovered, whatever evidence he'd compiled during yesterday's performance, it would be public before sunrise. 70 million people had watched the live stream. How many would see the sequel? Ford's hands, steady enough to guide actors through 50-foot falls, precise enough to carve hummingbird wings from basswood, trembled as he clicked his inbox. The email sat at the top, timestamp showing it had arrived during the workshop break-in. A distraction. Everything had been calculated. The subject line read, "What you didn't tell me about my father." Below it, a single attachment, Sarah Gosling Trustery.mp4. Ford's blood turned to ice water, the real secret, the one that had kept him awake for 15 years. The reason he'd agreed to the cover-up in the first place. Gosling didn't just know about the equipment malfunction, he knew about who had really been drinking that night. He knew about the real reason Sarah Gosling had died, and if that video went live in 53 minutes, he knew it would destroy more than just Ford's remaining reputation. It would destroy the memory of the only father Ryan Gosling had ever known. The workshop lights triggered again. Through the window, Ford watched Gosling emerge empty-handed, walking toward the cabin's front door with the confidence of someone who held all the cards. Ford lowered the shotgun. This wasn't ending with violence. It was ending with a choice. Protect the lie that had consumed his life, or let the truth destroy the last innocent person in this 15-year-old tragedy. The soft knock on his front door echoed through the cabin like a judge's gavel. Time to finish our conversation. Harrison Ford. What secrets do you think Harrison Ford is still hiding? Drop your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that follow button. Tomorrow's chapter reveals what really happened the night Sarah Gosling died. And trust me, you won't see it coming. Harrison Ford didn't move toward the door. Instead, he found himself frozen at the kitchen window, staring at his own reflection in the glass. A ghost of the man who'd once commanded Hollywood sets with military precision. The Remington hung loose in his grip, suddenly feeling less like protection and more like the prop it had always been. Behind him, the cabin breathed with 15 years of careful solitude, hand-hewn log walls that he'd chinked himself during those first raw months of exile, the Riverstone fireplace where he'd burned every industry contact, every script, every reminder of who Harrison Ford used to be. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a shrine to the life he'd murdered the night Sarah Gosling died. "I know you're listening, Harrison Ford." Gosling's voice carried through the heavy oak door, patient as a confession booth. "I know you're thinking about that email, about what happens when the timer runs out." Ford's eyes drifted to the laptop screen, its glow the only light in the kitchen. 51 minutes. The video attachment sat unopened, but he didn't need to watch it. He'd lived it. Frame by frame, for 15 years. The knock came again, softer this time, almost gentle. "I'm not here for revenge," Gosling continued. "I'm here for the truth about my father. Your father." The words hit Ford like a missed stunt pad. If Gosling knew about that night, really knew, then he understood the impossible choice Ford had made. Protect the drunk director who'd killed Sarah Gosling, or destroy the hero worship of a 5-year-old boy who'd already lost his mother. Ford set the shotgun against the wall and walked to the door. His bare feet found every familiar groove in the hardwood planks, each board hand-selected from Douglas firs that had fallen naturally on his property. Everything here was intentional, controlled, the opposite of that chaotic night in 2009 when everything that mattered had spun beyond repair. He paused with his hand on the deadbolt. Through the peephole, Gosling stood in the porch light like an actor waiting for his cue. But this wasn't performance. Ford could read the difference after 30 years of directing stunts. The rigid shoulders, the controlled breathing, the way his hands hung at his sides without the calculated gesture work of camera-conscious movement. This was a son looking for his father's ghost. Ford turned the deadbolt. The metal clicked like a camera shutter. "You want to know about your father?" Ford pulled the door open, studying Gosling's face in the harsh porch light. "Come in, but understand something first. Once I tell you what really happened that night, you can't unknow it. Some secrets exist to protect the people we love." Gosling stepped across the threshold, his eyes immediately scanning the cabin's interior. Ford watched him take inventory, the sparse furniture, the absence of photographs, the careful sterility of a life scrubbed clean of memories. The only personal touches were Ford's wood carvings. A dozen pieces scattered across shelves and tables, each one a meditation on guilt carved in cedar and pine. "You live like a monk," Gosling observed, running his finger along a hand-carved bookshelf. "Is this penance or hiding?" "Both." Ford closed the door and engaged the deadbolt. "Coffee? If we're doing this, we're doing it right." He moved to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding him through the ritual of grinding beans and heating water. The familiar sounds, the burr grinder's whir, the kettle's whistle, created a buffer of normalcy against the enormity of what was coming. His hands found their rhythm in the routine. The same precision that had once guided actors through impossible stunts now focused on the simple alchemy of extraction and timing. Gosling settled into one of the two kitchen chairs, the only seating in the entire cabin. Ford had built this place for solitude, but tonight it felt less like sanctuary and more like a confessional booth. 48 minutes, Gosling said, checking his phone. Before that video goes live. You think I'm afraid of exposure? Ford poured hot water over the coffee grounds, watching them bloom and darken. Kid, I've been dead to the world for 15 years. What's left to destroy? Your peace, Gosling replied quietly. This place, this life you've built, the way people remember your mother. Ford's hand stilled over the coffee pot. There it was, the leverage Gosling had been building toward. Not just the threat of truth, but the promise of its consequences. Sarah Gosling's legacy wasn't the only reputation at stake. Tell me about the night she died, Gosling pressed. Not the official story, not the equipment malfunction, the real story, what you've been protecting all these years. Ford filled 2 mugs, the coffee dark as Oregon timber. Steam rose between them like incense, and for a moment the cabin felt less like a hiding place and more like what it had always been, a tomb where the past came to die. He slid 1 mug across the table to Gosling. Your mother, Ford said finally, died saving the wrong person. The coffee mug sat untouched between Ryan Gosling's hands as Harrison Ford's words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Died saving the wrong person. The phrase seemed to echo off the cabin's log walls, gaining weight with each reverberation. What does that mean? Gosling's voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there moments before, the first crack in his carefully constructed composure. Ford wrapped his weathered fingers around his own mug, drawing warmth from the ceramic. Through the kitchen window, the first hints of dawn bled across the Oregon sky, painting the Douglas firs in shades of gray and amber. 46 minutes until the video went live. 46 minutes before everything changed. Your mother was the best stunt woman I ever worked with, Ford began, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from his coffee. Fearless, but never reckless. She understood the difference between courage and stupidity. That night, he paused, the weight of 15 years pressing against his chest. That night, someone else didn't. Gosling leaned forward, his actor's instincts reading the subtext in Ford's hesitation. The director, James Morrison. He was drunk. Drunk doesn't begin to cover it. Ford's grip tightened on the mug. Morrison had been spiraling for months. Divorce proceedings, studio pressure, pills on top of whiskey on top of whatever else he could get his hands on. We all knew it. The whole crew knew it. The laptop screen pulsed in Ford's peripheral vision, its glow a constant reminder of the ticking clock. That video, whatever evidence Gosling had compiled, would paint Ford as the villain. The stunt coordinator who falsified reports, who covered up negligence, who helped stage a death as equipment malfunction. But it wouldn't tell them about the 5-year-old boy waiting at home for his father. The stunt was simple, Ford continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Wire work, 20 feet up, safety harness with redundant clips. Your mother had done it 100 times. But Morrison, Ford's jaw clenched. Morrison decided he wanted a different angle. Last minute, no safety meeting, no equipment check. He just started screaming about artistic vision and studio interference. Through the window, a raven landed on the workshop roof, one of the descendants of the birds Ford had been carving for 15 years. The same species whose wooden likeness Gosling had destroyed hours earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. The equipment didn't malfunction, Gosling said. It wasn't a question. The rigging was perfect. Your mother checked it herself, like always. Ford's hands began to shake, coffee sloshing against the mug's rim. But Morrison changed the sequence. Mid-take, started directing from the platform, 20 feet up, drunk out of his mind. The memory unfolded like a film reel that had been spliced and respliced 1,000 times. Ford could still see it frame by frame, Morrison stumbling on the platform, his weight shifting toward the edge. Sarah Gosling's immediate reaction, lunging forward not because the stunt required it, but because she saw a man about to fall. She saved him, Ford whispered, grabbed Morrison, pulled him back from the edge. But the force of it, the angle, her own line went taut. The safety clips held, but the platform didn't. 20-year-old steel finally gave way under the stress. Gosling's face had gone pale in the kitchen light. She died saving Morrison. She died saving your father. The words hit the kitchen like a physical force. Gosling's mug slipped from his fingers, coffee spreading across the rough-hewn table in dark rivulets that reminded Ford of blood on a soundstage floor. My father? The actor's voice cracked like a teenager's. My father died in a car accident when I was 7. James Morrison was just... James Morrison legally adopted you 8 months after Sarah died. Ford reached across the table, his hand closing over papers that had been sitting under Gosling's coffee mug. Birth certificate, adoption records, name change documentation. You think I didn't know who you really were the moment you showed up here? Gosling stared at the documents, his hands trembling as he processed what he was seeing. James Morrison, the drunk director whose negligence had killed Sarah Gosling, was the same man who had raised her son as his own, the same man who had become Ryan's hero, his inspiration, his reason for entering the film industry. He never told me, Gosling whispered. He said my birth father died before I was born. He said he met my mother when I was a baby, that he chose to be my dad. He did choose, Ford said quietly. After that night, Morrison got sober, stayed sober, left directing, left Hollywood, became the father you needed him to be. That's what your mother died for, not to save a drunk director, but to save the man he could become, the father he could become. Outside, the raven cawed once and took flight, disappearing into the brightening sky. Gosling's phone buzzed against the table. 30 minutes until the video went live. So what happens now? Ford asked. You expose the truth and destroy the memory of the only father you ever knew, or you understand why some secrets are worth keeping. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of Ford's handmade clock and the distant sound of the river that had been his only companion for 15 years. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, 29 minutes from snapping. Gosling stared at the adoption papers as if they might rearrange themselves into a different truth, but the official seals and notarized signatures remained stubbornly real. Ford watched the actor's face cycle through the stages of revelation. Denial, anger, bargaining with reality itself. This is impossible, Gosling finally whispered, pushing back from the table. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on coffin wood. Jimmy Morrison taught me how to ride a bike. He came to every school play, every Little League game. He never drank, not once in front of me. He was a good father, Ford finished, because your mother's death broke him apart and put him back together sober. Guilt is a powerful motivator. Gosling began pacing the small kitchen, his actor's physicality betraying the chaos beneath his controlled exterior. Ford had seen this before on sets. The moment when a performer's carefully constructed character cracked under pressure, revealing the human being underneath. But this wasn't performance. This was a 30-year-old man discovering his entire identity was built on a lie of protection. You're telling me I spent 2 years investigating my mother's death, planning this confrontation, orchestrating a public exposure, all to destroy the man who raised me? Gosling's voice pitched higher with each word. The man who gave up everything to become my father. Ford's phone buzzed against the table, a text from an unknown number, 27 minutes. You can still stop this. A friend, ice water flooded Ford's veins. He'd told no one about tonight's conversation. The cabin had no landline, no security system, no way for anyone to monitor what happened within these walls. Yet someone was watching. Someone was counting down. Ryan, Ford said carefully, who else knew you were coming here? But Gosling wasn't listening. He'd stopped pacing and was staring at something behind Ford's shoulder, a small framed photograph on the kitchen windowsill, the only picture in the entire cabin. Ford had forgotten it was there, muscle memory having edited it out of his daily awareness years ago. Is that her? Gosling's voice had gone soft, almost childlike. Ford turned to look at the photograph, Sarah Gosling in full stunt gear, suspended 30 feet above a soundstage, her face bright with the particular joy of someone doing exactly what they were born to do. It had been taken 3 days before she died. "She looks like you," Ford said. "Same eyes, same stubborn chin." Gosling approached the window as if the photograph might flee. His reflection ghosted over the image, son and mother occupying the same space across the barrier of time and glass. "I don't remember her. Jimmy showed me pictures, but they were all family shots. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, normal mom stuff. I never saw her like this." "She lived for the work," Ford said. "The bigger the stunt, the brighter she smiled. She used to say that fear was just excitement wearing a disguise." Another text arrived, 24 minutes. "The live stream has already started. 50,000 viewers waiting." Ford's hands went numb. This wasn't just about Ryan's private revelation anymore. Someone had turned their conversation into entertainment, their reckoning into content. But who? And how? "Ryan, check your phone. Is your camera running?" Gosling pulled out his device, frowning at the screen. "No, I shut everything down after." His face went white. "This isn't possible. The camera app is active, but I never turned it on. And there's a live stream notification." The cabin's isolation suddenly felt less like sanctuary and more like a trap. Ford's mind raced through possibilities: hidden cameras, hacked phones, someone watching from the tree line with long-range equipment. The workshop break-in hadn't been about destruction. It had been about placement. "We're being broadcast," Ford said. "Right now, this whole conversation." Gosling was frantically swiping at his phone screen. "I can't shut it off. The controls are locked out." "Jesus Christ, how long has this been running?" Ford moved to his laptop, but the screen was frozen on the email countdown timer. 22 minutes, 21. The machine had been compromised, turned into a prop in someone else's production. "The truth about the adoption records," Gosling said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. "My confronting you about the cover-up, your revelation about Jimmy being my father. It's all been streaming live." The weight of exposure hit them simultaneously. 50,000 strangers had just watched Ryan Gosling discover his entire life was built on a lie. They'd seen Harrison Ford admit to falsifying stunt reports. They'd witnessed the destruction of two men's carefully constructed realities in real time. But worse than the exposure was the implication. Someone had orchestrated all of this. Someone who knew about the adoption, about the cover-up, about the exact psychological pressure points that would force both men to reveal their deepest secrets. Ford's blood turned to winter. "Ryan, who told you where to find me?" Outside, the ravens began to circle. The question hung between them like a blade suspended by spider silk. Gosling's face cycled through confusion, then recognition, then something approaching horror as the implications crystallized. "I found you through my research," he began, but his voice lacked conviction. "Public records, property transfers." "Bullshit." Ford's laptop screen flickered, and for a moment he glimpsed the live stream interface. Viewer count climbing past 60,000. Chat messages scrolling too fast to read. "I've been off the grid for 15 years. No credit cards, no phone bills in my name, no digital footprint. This place is owned by a shell company that doesn't exist on paper. So I'll ask again, who gave you my location?" Gosling sank into his chair as if the weight of realization was crushing him from above. There was a message. "Anonymous tip through my agent. Said someone wanted to help me find the truth about my mother's death." "When?" 3 weeks ago. Included your address, background on the cover-up, even..." Gosling's hand moved to his jacket pocket, withdrawing a manila envelope Ford hadn't noticed before. "Even these adoption papers. I thought it was from someone who worked on the film. A crew member with a guilty conscience." Ford reached for the envelope, his fingers recognizing the weight and texture of expensive paper. Inside were photocopies of documents that should have been sealed forever. Adoption proceedings, medical records, even Morrison's sobriety court mandates from 2009. Someone with serious access had compiled this dossier. "The anonymous tipster," Ford said slowly. "They didn't just give you information. They gave you a script, led you here at the exact moment when I'd be most vulnerable, most likely to tell you everything." Through the live stream, Ford could hear the distant sound of engines, multiple vehicles moving through the forest roads that led to his property. The isolation he'd cultivated for 15 years was evaporating in real time, his sanctuary becoming ground zero for a media circus he couldn't stop. The laptop screen brightened, and text began appearing in what looked like a chat interface. "The viewers want answers, gentlemen. Tell them about the real reason Sarah Gosling had to die." Ford's stomach dropped into free fall. "Ryan, someone's in our system. They're communicating through the live stream." She discovered something that night, didn't she, Harrison? Something that made her dangerous to more people than just a drunk director. Gosling read over Ford's shoulder, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "What is this? What aren't you telling me?" But Ford was remembering details he'd buried so deep they'd calcified into nightmares. Sarah Gosling's behavior in the weeks before her death, the hushed phone calls, the way she'd started arriving early and leaving late, always with a leather portfolio clutched under her arm. The questions she'd been asking about insurance payouts and production budgets. "Tell him about the photographs, Harrison. The ones Sarah found in Morrison's trailer." The coffee in Ford's stomach turned to acid. Those photographs, he'd convinced himself they were destroyed in the fire that consumed the production office 3 days after Sarah's death. A convenient accident that had eliminated evidence of Morrison's financial arrangement with certain investors, men who had funded the film through channels that existed in the gray spaces between legal and criminal. What photographs? Gosling's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. The controlled desperation of a man who sensed another revelation approaching like a freight train. Sarah Gosling wasn't just a stunt woman, was she? She was an investigator, hired by the studio's insurance company to look into production irregularities, cost overruns, missing equipment, the kind of discrepancies that suggested someone was skimming money. Ford's hands began to shake as memories surfaced like bodies in a thawing lake. Sarah's questions about equipment manifests, her interest in crew schedules and overtime reports, the way she'd watched Morrison not with concern for his drinking, but with the focused attention of someone building a case. She was investigating financial fraud, Ford whispered, the words scraping his throat raw. Insurance fraud. The production company was a front for money laundering, and Morrison was too drunk to notice his investors were using the film to clean cash. The viewer count on the live stream had climbed past 80,000. In the chat, messages were scrolling faster now, reporters identifying themselves, entertainment journalists demanding confirmation, amateur internet detectives connecting dots in real time. But you knew, didn't you, Harrison? You were part of it. The inflated stunt budgets, the ghost employees, the equipment purchases that never materialized. No. The word came out like a prayer, but even as Ford spoke it, he knew the truth was more complex. He'd signed off on budgets without questioning the numbers. He'd filed equipment reports for gear that never arrived. He'd been willfully blind because the money was good and the work kept coming. Gosling's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen showed Jimmy Morrison above a photograph of the man who had raised him. The engines outside were getting closer. Gosling stared at the phone screen as if it were a loaded weapon. Jimmy Morrison's face smiled back at him, the same gentle expression that had wished him good night for 23 years, the same eyes that had never once betrayed the secret they carried. The phone buzzed again, insistent as a heartbeat. "Answer it," Ford said quietly. "Put it on speaker." "Ryan?" Morrison's voice filled the kitchen, carrying the weight of decades and the tremor of a man who knew his world was ending. "Son, I just got a call from my publicist. There's something on the internet, something about your mother." The word son hit different now. Not the easy affection Gosling had grown up with, but a claim staked in blood and guilt, paid for with 15 years of sobriety and silence. "I know," Gosling said, his voice barely recognizable. "I know everything, Jimmy." The silence on the other end stretched like a held breath. Through the phone they could hear traffic, car doors slamming. Morrison was moving, probably toward them. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," Morrison finally whispered. "Christ, Ryan, you weren't supposed to find out at all." Ford watched Gosling's face crumble and rebuild itself in real time. The actor was discovering that every truth he'd thought he was fighting for had been constructed to protect him from a larger lie. His mother hadn't just died in an accident. She'd been murdered to protect a conspiracy that Morrison had unknowingly facilitated. The night she died, Morrison continued through the phone, his words coming faster now. Sarah came to my trailer. She had evidence, photographs, financial records, proof that the investors were using our film to launder money through phantom equipment purchases and inflated crew costs. The live stream chat was exploding with activity. Ford caught glimpses of entertainment reporters tagging news outlets, federal investigators being summoned to monitor feeds, amateur detectives cross-referencing Morrison's filmography with known money laundering operations from the 2000s. She was going to the FBI the next morning, Morrison said, but someone found out. The rigging didn't fail, Ryan. It was cut. 70% through, just enough to hold until the stress hit. They made it look like an equipment malfunction, but it was execution. Gosling's knees buckled. He grabbed the kitchen counter for support, his face cycling through emotions faster than any camera could capture. You've known this for 30 years. You let me believe she died because of your negligence. You let me hate you. Better you hate me for drinking than know someone murdered your mother to keep her quiet. Morrison's voice broke completely. Better you think I was weak than know I was complicit in getting her killed. The revelation recontextualized everything. Morrison's sobriety, his departure from Hollywood, his obsessive attention to Ryan's safety and well-being. Not just guilt over a preventable accident, but the bone-deep terror of a man who knew his son carried the same investigative instincts that had gotten his mother murdered. Through the laptop, text appeared from their anonymous manipulator. Beautiful, isn't it? Watch him realize that everyone he's ever trusted has lied to him. Ford felt something cold settle in his chest, the recognition of true malice. Someone had orchestrated this destruction not for justice or truth, but for the pure sadistic pleasure of watching a family destroy itself in real time. The adoption revelation, the live stream setup, even Morrison's perfectly timed phone call, all of it choreographed to maximize psychological damage. Ryan, Ford said urgently, this isn't about exposing the truth. Someone's playing us. They want you broken. But Gosling was beyond hearing. The man who'd walked into Ford's cabin seeking justice for his mother's death had discovered that his entire identity was built on lies within lies within lies. His mother had been an investigator, not just a stunt woman. His father wasn't his father, and his father had unknowingly facilitated his mother's murder. The man who raised him had spent 3 decades lying to protect him from a truth that would have destroyed him. All those years, Gosling whispered into the phone, "You could have told me. We could have found who really killed her." "They're still out there, son." Morrison's voice carried the weight of 15 years of looking over his shoulder. "The investors, their associates, people who kill to protect money. You think I stayed quiet to protect myself? I stayed quiet to keep you alive." Outside, the engine sounds had stopped. Through the window, Ford caught glimpses of movement in the tree line, figures with cameras, with equipment, positioning themselves for the final act of whatever drama they'd been cast in without their knowledge. The viewer count hit 100,000. "Ryan," Ford said, understanding flooding through him like ice water, "your mother didn't just find evidence of money laundering. She found something bigger, something worth killing for, and worth 30 years of silence." Morrison's voice came through the phone one last time, heavy with surrender. "She found out who really owns Hollywood." The words hung in the digital air like a death sentence. 130,000 viewers now, the number climbing with the relentless hunger of a feeding frenzy. Ford watched the chat explode with speculation. Journalists frantically taking screenshots, federal agencies probably already mobilizing response teams. But all of that felt distant compared to the immediate horror of watching Ryan Gosling's psychological architecture collapse in real time. "Who owns Hollywood?" Gosling repeated, his voice hollow as an abandoned theater. "What the hell does that mean?" Morrison's breathing through the phone speaker had turned labored, the sound of a man climbing toward a truth he'd spent decades avoiding. "Sarah found connections, Ryan. Financial networks that tied together studios, distribution companies, talent agencies, even the unions. A shadow ownership structure that controlled not just what movies got made, but who got to make them." Ford felt the walls of his sanctuary pressing inward. Through the window, he could see figures moving with military precision through his property, not reporters or curious fans, but professionals with serious equipment. Spotlights began illuminating the cabin's exterior, turning their private breakdown into a stage-lit performance. The laptop screen flickered again, and new text appeared. "Tell him about the list, James. The names Sarah photographed." Morrison's sharp intake of breath was audible even through the phone. Jesus Christ, they're listening. After all these years, they're still listening. "What list?" Ford demanded. But he was already remembering fragments. Sarah's leather portfolio, the way she'd guarded it like classified material, the careful notes she'd made about crew members who didn't seem to have any actual film experience. "Foreign nationals," Morrison whispered. "People with diplomatic immunity working as grips and gaffers in craft services. Money flowing through shell companies based in countries where financial transparency doesn't exist." Sarah had documented a system for moving cash and people through Hollywood productions. Gosling's phone buzzed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as Mother, an impossibility that made all three men freeze. On the screen, a photograph appeared. Sarah Gosling's leather portfolio, open to reveal pages of handwritten notes and contact sheets covered in surveillance photographs. The timestamp on the image was 3 minutes ago. "That's not possible," Gosling whispered. "My mother's been dead for 30 years. But Ford was studying the photograph with the eye of a man who'd spent 15 years cataloging every detail of that night. The handwriting was Sarah's. He'd seen her equipment logs too many times to forget. But the paper looked fresh, unstained by age or storage. And in the background of the photograph, barely visible, was a computer monitor displaying the live stream they were currently living through. Someone had Sarah Gosling's portfolio. Someone had been holding it for 3 decades. Someone was using it now as the final twist in their carefully orchestrated psychological torture. The laptop speaker crackled to life with a voice none of them had heard before, electronically distorted but unmistakably female. "Hello, Ryan. You look so much like her." Gosling's face went white as bone. "Who are you?" "Someone who knew your mother. Someone who was there the night she died. Someone who's been waiting 30 years for you to grow old enough to understand what she really discovered." Through the cabin windows, Ford could see the spotlights repositioning, creating a perfect perimeter of illumination. They weren't just being watched anymore, they were being contained. The chat count had passed 150,000, and the messages were no longer speculation. Official verification badges appeared next to major news outlets, government handles, international media. "Sarah found more than money laundering," the voice continued. "She found a pipeline. Cash flowing one direction, people flowing the other. Individuals with very specific skill sets entering the country on entertainment visas, then disappearing into networks that had nothing to do with filmmaking." Morrison's voice came through the phone like a man confessing from his deathbed. "Assassins. Money launderers. People traffickers." The film industry was cover for an international criminal network, and Sarah had documented the entire operation. The revelation hit Ford like a physical blow. Sarah Gosling hadn't just stumbled onto financial fraud. She'd uncovered a conspiracy that used Hollywood as camouflage for activities that could destabilize governments. The kind of discovery that didn't just get you killed, but erased from history entirely. The night she died, the electronic voice said, "Sarah gave birth to you, Ryan. And she gave birth to something else, a failsafe. Evidence hidden so deep that even she forgot where she'd placed it." Gosling's breathing had become rapid and shallow. "What are you talking about? Your adoption wasn't random. Your placement with James Morrison wasn't coincidence. Sarah chose your father specifically because he was clean enough to protect you, but connected enough to give you access when the time came." The laptop screen filled with a document Ford recognized. DNA test results, dated 3 weeks ago. But the comparison wasn't between Ryan and Morrison. It was between Ryan's DNA and genetic material extracted from evidence that had been sealed in federal storage for 30 years. The match was perfect. Ryan Gosling wasn't just Sarah's son. He was also the biological key to accessing whatever she'd hidden before she died. The DNA results stared back at them like an accusation. Ford watched Gosling's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and something approaching terror as the implications crystallized. The viewer count had reached 200,000, a live audience for the destruction of a man's entire understanding of himself. "Biometric lock," Ford said quietly, pieces clicking together in his mind. She used your DNA as a key. The electronic voice confirmed his worst fears. Sarah embedded genetic scanners in safety deposit boxes across 3 countries. Evidence that could bring down networks worth billions. Evidence that could expose government officials, entertainment executives, foreign operatives, all protected by her son's genetic code. Gosling staggered backward, his shoulder hitting the kitchen wall. You're telling me my mother turned me into a living password for her investigation? She turned you into the most protected person in America. Morrison's voice cracked through the phone. Nobody could access what she hid without keeping you alive and safe. It's why they never came after you, Ryan. It's why I could raise you without fear. Ford felt the terrible elegance of Sarah's plan settling over him like a shroud. She'd known she was going to die, known her investigation had marked her for elimination, so she'd created a dead man's switch that required her son to live, to thrive, to eventually become famous enough that his disappearance would trigger international attention. The spotlights outside shifted again, and Ford caught movement in his peripheral vision, black vehicles positioning themselves along his property line. Not media anymore. Government response teams, probably federal, maybe international. The live stream had evolved beyond entertainment into a live national security incident. The night she died, Morrison whispered through the phone, Sarah gave me something. An envelope with instructions. Told me never to open it unless Ryan came looking for the truth about her death. Gosling's voice came out strangled. You have instructions? From her? In my car. I'm 10 minutes out from Ford's place. Morrison's breathing was ragged. Ryan, listen to me carefully. Whatever happens next, remember that everything I did was to keep you safe. Everything she did was to give you the power to finish what she started. The laptop screen flickered, and new text appeared, not from their mysterious manipulator, but from official government accounts now monitoring the stream. This is Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. Mr. Gosling, do not attempt to access any safety deposit boxes or storage facilities. Federal authorities are en route to secure your location, but the electronic voice overrode the official warnings. Too late for containment, Agent Chen. The world is watching now. Ryan has a choice to make. Ford realized with crystalline clarity that they'd been maneuvered into this moment with surgical precision. The anonymous tipster, the live stream setup, even Morrison's perfectly timed arrival, all orchestrated to force Gosling into a decision that would either expose a 30-year conspiracy or bury it forever. Who are you? Ford demanded, speaking directly to their unseen manipulator. What do you want? I want what Sarah wanted, the voice replied. Justice, truth, the end of a system that uses art as cover for atrocity. But Gosling was looking at the live stream chat, watching messages scroll past from verified accounts representing governments, news organizations, and what looked like international law enforcement. His face had gone beyond pale into a territory Ford recognized from his stunt days, the expression of someone who just realized they were standing on the edge of a cliff they hadn't seen coming. Ryan, Ford said urgently, you don't have to do this. Whatever she hid, whatever choice she left you, you can walk away. Let the government handle it. Walk away? Gosling's laugh carried no humor. And spend the rest of my life knowing that my mother died to protect evidence that could save other people's lives? That I'm the only key to exposing the network that killed her? Through the phone, they could hear Morrison's car engine getting closer. Through the windows, Ford could see helicopters approaching in the distance, their searchlights cutting through the Oregon darkness. The sanctuary he'd built to escape the consequences of one covered-up death was about to become ground zero for the exposure of a conspiracy that stretched across decades. The choice isn't whether to open what she hid, Morrison said through the phone, his voice heavy with the weight of 30 years of secrets. The choice is whether to do it publicly or let the government bury it again. Gosling looked directly into the laptop camera, addressing the 250,000 people watching his psychological demolition in real time. When he spoke, his voice carried the controlled desperation of a man who'd discovered that his entire life had been orchestrated by a dead woman's love and paranoia. My mother didn't just die investigating corruption in Hollywood, he said. She died protecting evidence of something bigger, something worth killing for, something worth 30 years of silence. He reached for the laptop, his finger hovering over the keyboard. Let's see what she found. The cursor blinked in the search field like a heartbeat. 250,000 people held their collective breath as Gosling's finger trembled over the enter key. Ford watched the young man's face, seeing not the polished actor who'd walked into his cabin hours ago, but something raw and broken and impossibly determined. "Ryan," Ford said softly, "once you do this, there's no going back." Gosling's eyes never left the screen. There was never any going back. She made sure of that the day she died. He pressed enter. The screen exploded with files, documents, photographs, financial records, 30 years of carefully preserved evidence flooding across the live stream in a cascade that made Ford's eyes water. Bank routing numbers, diplomatic passport scans, surveillance photographs of people Ford recognized from film sets mixing with others he'd only seen in international news coverage. The chat went silent. Even the federal warnings stopped appearing. The world was watching the digital exhumation of secrets that governments had killed to protect. Morrison's headlights swept across the cabin windows as his car pulled into the driveway. Through the phone, they could hear his car door slam, footsteps running across gravel. The sound of a man racing toward a reckoning he'd spent 3 decades avoiding. "Jesus Christ." Morrison's voice came from both the phone and the front porch simultaneously. "Ryan, what have you done?" But Gosling wasn't listening anymore. He was scrolling through his mother's files with the intensity of a man reading his own death sentence. Ford caught glimpses of the evidence over his shoulder, proof of financial networks that spanned continents, of entertainment visas issued to people with military training, of film productions that existed only on paper while moving real money and real people through borders that should have been impermeable. The electronic voice crackled through the laptop speakers. One final time. Sarah Gosling died for this. She died believing that someday her son would be strong enough to finish what she started. "Who are you?" Ford demanded again, but he already knew the answer wouldn't matter. Whoever had orchestrated this destruction had achieved their goal. The evidence was public now, permanently archived by hundreds of thousands of witnesses, impossible to contain or deny. Morrison burst through the cabin door, his face haggard with exhaustion and terror. In his hand was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, with Ryan written across it in Sarah's careful handwriting. "She knew," Morrison said, his voice breaking as he stared at the laptop screen. Somehow she knew exactly how this would play out. Gosling took the envelope with hands that shook like autumn leaves. Inside was a single photograph. Sarah Gosling in a hospital bed, hours after giving birth, holding a newborn Ryan while surrounded by documents and files. On the back, her handwriting, "For my son, who will grow up to be braver than his mother." Ford felt something shift in his chest. Not the crushing weight of guilt he'd carried for 15 years, but something lighter. Recognition, maybe. Or absolution. Sarah Gosling had orchestrated her own justice from beyond the grave, and in doing so, she'd freed all of them from the prisons they'd built from her death. The helicopters were landing now, their searchlights turning the Oregon forest into a stage. Federal agents would be at the door within minutes, followed by international authorities, journalists, investigators who would spend years unraveling the network Sarah had exposed in a single night. But Ford found himself watching Gosling's face instead of the chaos outside. The young man was staring at the photograph of his mother, tears streaming down his cheeks, but his expression wasn't one of grief anymore. It was peace, the terrible, hard-won peace of a man who'd finally learned the truth about himself and found it bearable. "She loved you," Ford said quietly. "Everything she did because she loved you." Gosling nodded, unable to speak. Morrison moved to stand behind his son, not his biological son, but his son nonetheless, and placed a protective hand on his shoulder. The live stream was still running. The evidence was still flowing across screens around the world. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Ford felt like they might survive it. Outside, heavy footsteps approached the porch. Official voices called for everyone to remain calm, to cooperate, to understand that they were now under federal protection. Ford looked around his cabin, his sanctuary, his prison, his refuge from a world that demanded more courage than he'd thought he possessed. Tomorrow, this would all be over. The investigations would begin, the trials would follow, and the truth Sarah Gosling had died protecting would finally see light. But tonight, watching Ryan Gosling hold his mother's final message, while helicopters thundered overhead and the world watched his pain transform into purpose, Ford understood that some stories were worth the telling. Even when they destroyed everything you thought you knew about yourself, the screen went dark, the live stream ended. The real story was just beginning.